Welcome to Murder by Nature, where we discuss true crime, mysterious disappearances, and unsolved cases. I am your host, Jasmine, and if you're brave enough to join us into the journey of the unknown, climb aboard. Now, before we dive into this day's episode, I'm going to put a massive trigger warning here that this involves child abuse. This is a case very close and dear to my heart, and I know to a lot of my followers. Now, as we dive into this case, please be mindful of what you're listening to, because it is rough on the heart. Now, this is my first video podcast on YouTube. I'm going to try and do more of these and get into the hang of it, but please let me know how you like the audio, how you like the video. I'm using OBS right now, but I do know a lot of people use StreamYard, Riverside. Let me know what you think and kind of give me your recommendations in the comments, because I need some help. But we're going to dive into this episode. Our references for today are KTLA, ABC, Yucaipa Police Department, San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, Riverside District Attorney, KESQ, sorry Eddie, and every other streaming platform that you can think of on this case. Now, as we dive in, we're going to get into the facts of a case, and please, trigger warning as you move forward. August 14th, 2025. It began like any ordinary summer day, until it wasn't. At 7:40 p.m., a frantic call came into the Yucaipa Police Department. A mother was calling from the parking lot at Big 5. She told police that she was changing her baby in the back of her truck on the back seat when a man came up to her, tapped her on the shoulder, and said, "Hola." And then everything went dark. She was socked, dropped to the floor, unconscious. And when she came to, her 7-month-old son, Emmanuel Haro, was gone. Yucaipa Police Department rushed to the scene. They secured the area immediately dived into an investigation. 8 p.m., helicopters were in the air, sweeping the neighborhood, broadcasting an urgent alert to the community. A missing 7-month-old, Hispanic. He was last seen wearing a black Nike onesie. He weighs approximately 21 pounds, stood about 24 inches tall, had brown hair, brown eyes, and was cross-eyed. Residents were urged to be on the lookout. As word spread, neighbors poured into the streets, joining the search to find Emmanuel. Law enforcement deployed K-9 units in hopes to track some form of scent of him at the Big 5 and to see what direction he left in. But shockingly, there was no scent detected. Now, during this chaos, Rebecca Haro called her husband, Jake Haro, to tell him their baby had been kidnapped. He was taken. He was gone. And Rebecca was at the Big 5. She was trying to buy a mouthguard for her stepson. That's why she went there. So approximately at 7 o'clock, she left the 7th Street Park. That's where Yucaipa Juvenile American plays. And she took the baby to go to Big 5 to get this mouthguard because her stepson lost it. Now, witnesses described Jake at the scene as frantic. He was trying to get a ride up to the Big 5. He wanted to be there with Rebecca. He wanted answers. He wanted to join the search. And what began as a routine errand turned into a community-wide search for a missing infant, a mystery that would only deepen as the night went on. But that's not where the story truly starts. That's not where this nightmare begins. That's not where this entire case revolves around in the beginning. Eventually, what would consume this family started years earlier, long before Emmanuel was born, long before Jake ever knew Rebecca. To understand what happened, we're going to go back to October 12th, 2018. At this time, Jake Haro was married to a woman named Vanessa, and just 10 weeks earlier, the couple had welcomed their daughter, Carolina Rose. She came into the world, and we're going to start here. They were adjusting to the life of a newborn, navigating exhaustion, routines with a growing family, and this day, Vanessa picked Jake up from work. She drove them home. They got all settled in, and shortly after they arrived, Vanessa needed to leave again. She had to go to Beaumont, California to pick up her eldest daughter from school. So she leaves Vanessa at home with the baby, and she goes about her way to go get her daughter. Now, once they were settled into the house, Jake noticed that Carolina had felt warm. Her temperature was between 99 and 100 degrees, and he got a little concerned. He decided, hey, I'm going to give her a bath in the sink, I'm going to give her some Tylenol, and I hope that this brings down the fever. Now, as Jake bathed Caroline, he rinsed her in the sink, and she slipped from his hands. The infant immediately fell forward, and her left side of the chest struck the center of the sink. Now, Jake picked her up immediately, concerned, checked her for injuries. And to him, she seemed unharmed. So he removed her from the water, got her all dressed, got her all dry, and continued with the day. Now, roughly 45 minutes later, Vanessa returned home. She returned home with her eldest daughter. Jake tells her, hey, this happened. I dropped Caroline in the sink. Like, she seems okay. Everything seems fine, though. So they continued again with their day. Now, that evening, the couple went to bed around 9 p.m., and the house grew quiet. The kind of calm that happens before the day's worries kind of flush away. But in the early hours of the next morning, that calm was shattered. Vanessa woke up to this eerie feeling that something wasn't right. Something was wrong. And she picked up Caroline. Caroline didn't seem right, and she was trusting her instincts. So she wakes up Jake and says, hey, something's wrong with the baby. Like, I need you to feel her. I need you to check her. Jake pauses. He places his hand on the back of Caroline, and he said he felt almost like this crunch feeling. Something was off. It didn't seem normal. Now, that crunching, crackling feeling shouldn't have been there, he says. Caroline was crying, and it's not like your typical newborn cry. This was different. It was persistent. It was distressed. It was unfamiliar. And neither of them could actually pinpoint what was actually wrong with her. Now, they knew something clearly was, and Vanessa tried to nurse her, thinking, hey, let me settle her. She's 10 weeks old. Maybe this is just a phase. But she wouldn't settle. And the crying continued, and the uneasiness only grew. Caroline would latch and she would nurse, but then she would be restless. And Jake and Vanessa decided, we need to take her to the emergency room. Something is wrong. When they arrived at the Hemet Valley Hospital, staff quickly realized that this wasn't a simple accidentally fall in the bathtub with 10 weeks old. Almost immediately, Caroline was assessed, and the severity of her condition became very apparent. Doctors determined that Caroline suffered from an acute fractured rib, but as the examination continued, something more alarming emerged. She also had multiple rib fractures that were already healing. Healing fractures in a 10-week-old. I know you guys are hearing that right. Hemet Valley Hospital is not a children's hospital, and given the extent of her injuries, the nature of her injuries, the staff immediately was saying, we need to transport her to Loma Linda Hospital. It's a children's hospital. It's a Trauma 1 hospital, and they needed her there for a higher level of care. Now, upon arriving at Loma Linda Hospital, Carolina was intubated. She was placed in critical condition, and upon the next several hours, she underwent extensive testing. Now, a forensic pediatrician, Dr. Dale, reviewed her injuries and documented the findings that painted this horrible, devastating picture. And we're going to go into those. So again, trigger warning right here. Caroline had an acute fracture of her left fifth rib. She also had healing fractures of the left 6th, 7th, 10th, 11th, and 12th ribs. On the right side, there were healing injuries as well as the 6th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th rib. In addition to the healing fractures, the rib injuries, Caroline had a skull fracture, brain hemorrhaging, she had swelling of the neck, and a healing fractured tibia. As doctors worked to assess her and stabilize her, Carolina was fighting for her life. She was suffering from seizures. She was suffering from struggling to breathe. She remained irritable and at times inconsolable. She was crying in distress, even going through the intubation, even going through all these things she was going through. She was in pain. And what initially was described as this accident is now unfolding into something far more serious, far more disturbing. Doctors notified law enforcement immediately that their findings were deeply concerning, that the combination of Caroline's injuries in a pre-mobile, remember, she's 10 weeks old, you guys, pre-mobile, in the absence of any plausible history of significant trauma, in their medical opinion, was an indication of abuse. Specifically, they cited head trauma, child physical abuse, and nutritional neglect. Now, as the medical team worked to save her life, law enforcement began investigating, and what they discovered in that home was deeply concerning. Investigators reviewed this iPad. So there was an iPad in the home that belonged to the household, and they found a series of troubling events in this. At 1:19 a.m. on October 13th, 2018, This is hours before Caroline was sent to the hospital. Someone looked up this phrase, and I'm going to read it to you guys so you guys know. How to feed a baby with broken ribs. And is it hard to feed an infant with fractured ribs? The timing of these searches immediately raised red flags. On December 1st, 2018. Yep, 2 months later. Doctors at Loma Linda Children's Hospital completed a formal suspected child abuse and neglect examination on Caroline. Their findings were intense, severe. Caroline was diagnosed with hemorrhaging. She was diagnosed with brain trauma, brain injury, cervical spine injuries, retinal hemorrhaging. She was lethargic. She was experiencing seizures. And according to the medical team, these injuries were consistent with an accelerated, decelerated force that applies to the head, causing traumatic stress to the neck, commonly known as shaking baby syndrome. The skull fracture was determined to be consistent with an impact to the head. Multiple injuries to the ribs and fractures were typical from a squeezing mechanism to the chest. The healing fractures to her tibia was believed to be caused by a traumatic twisting motion, and doctors also documented that what the parents told them, what they explained to them. There is no absolute way that she fell from the sink to have this extent and severity of injuries. It didn't make sense. What she suffered doesn't align with what they said. And the medical evidence told a far different story than the one that they were being offered. And the investigators started to question Jake and Vanessa. They started to see what happened, and their accounts started to change. What was first described as this incident slowly turned into a shift of pattern of deflection, with each person blaming each other, each parent pointing the finger. And what slowly began as this accident turned into them placing blame on each other over their 10-week-old daughter, over what happened. Now, Jake told officers that he did not use that iPad. He didn't touch it on the day that's questioned. He claimed Vanessa had it. Vanessa used it. Vanessa's email was on it. It was at home. I didn't take it with me to work. He said that there's no one else that could be responsible for Carolina's injuries and pointed the finger at his wife. Investigators, however, were not convinced that this was the responsibility of just one of those parents. They didn't believe it. They weren't convinced. And based on the evidence, they believe both Jake and Vanessa were involved in causing these unjustifiable pain that their daughter went through at 10 weeks old. Now, shortly after Caroline was admitted to the hospital, family law records show that Jake Haro filed and requested a domestic violence restraining order against Vanessa. This case was later dismissed. And years later, you guys, October 5th, 2021, both Jake and Vanessa were formally charged with willful child cruelty. On October 8th, 2023, they each pled guilty to these charges. Jake Haro ultimately struck a deal with prosecutors, entering a guilty plea to one single count of willful child neglect. He was sentenced to 180 days in the sheriff's work release program and received a suspended sentence of a 4-year prison sentence, and was ordered to attend child abuser treatment programs. And this was a huge, controversial decision. It plays a huge part into this case. It plays a huge part into my thoughts, into other people's thoughts. This was a defining moment. The sentencing judge that did all of this, that made this decision possible, was resigning from San Bernardino County. They were just coming in to help with Riverside County. They weren't even from this district. And he opted not to send Jake to prison, even though prosecutors told him, this is a prison sentence. This is a prison case. What are you doing? The judge ruled Mr. Haro deserved an extra break. Vanessa Haro was sentenced to 120 days in the sheriff's work release program as well. She was ordered to attend child abuse treatment courses, and she kind of just skated underneath the radar. For many, this sentence marked the end of this court case, but not the end of questioning surrounding what happened to Carolina Rose. We still don't know what happened to Carolina. And since that day, Caroline did survive, but her life was changed forever. Vanessa's cousin and her husband adopted her. They stepped in, they took responsibility in raising her, and in that time, they formally adopted her, gave her a new name, Promise Faith. A name that was chosen not for what was taken from her, but for what they hoped she could represent. Promise turned 7 years old on July 31st. The injuries that she endured left her with profound and permanent disabilities. Promise now breathes through a trach. She requires constant suctioning to keep her airwaves clear. She's blind. She can't walk. She can't speak. And she only has 3% of her brain that works. She is fully developed on the care of other people, and every aspect that she does revolves around what they can do for her. But her caregivers did not stop there, and Jake and Vanessa's story does not end there. Along with adopting Promise, they also welcomed her brother into the home. Carlos, his name was originally Jake Mitchell Haro II, Jake and Vanessa's other child. He's now 8 years old. Carlos was born with fetal alcohol syndrome. And if you don't know what that is, that's when the mother drinks when she is pregnant with a child. And he too became a part of this family that chose to protect them, that chose to raise them, and chose to love them beyond everything that they have, to protect them against anybody and everybody. Now, what happened to Promise Faith is not just a story about survival, it's a story about irreversible harm. It's a story about lifelong consequences. And it now follows the violence that was inflicted on the most vulnerable. We now return to August 14th, 2025. Jake Haro was frantic, scrambling to find a ride to the Big Five on Yucaipa Boulevard. He was desperate to reach Rebecca, desperate for answers. Police lights flashed, helicopters circled overhead, and the search for 7-month Emmanuel Haro was on. Now, if you know this case, and you follow me, you know how invested I am into this case. Emmanuel Haro started the journey of so many relationships because of this case that we got to meet. And the reason that we're doing this podcast in this series and shining light onto this case is to ensure that the facts are out there. The facts of Emmanuel Haro's case. The facts of what happened during that search and what's happening now. So next week, on Wednesday at 8 a.m., we'll release part 2. The search for Emmanuel Haro. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope we did justice bringing light and awareness to Promise's case and revealed the background of Jake Haro. And that brings us to the end of this episode. As always, thank you for listening to Murder by Nature. I hope you guys follow me on TikTok. You guys follow me on every streaming platform, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you're listening right now. And we're on TikTok underneath Murder by Nature podcast. You guys can find us there. Now, I hope you come back for part 2 of Emmanuel's case. Until then, I'm Jasmine, your host, reminding you to stay vigilant, stay safe, and remember, don't get murdered, and please, for the love of God, don't turn into the murderer.